So this is the industry class for Tech-1 items. I think we're okay in this Mumble channel because I think the NSC class that seems to be going on is probably in the private channel in there. So we've cleared them out of lecture channel in game, and this should be for Tech-1 industry classes. But if you're expected to have some kind of discussion about the NSC, then you should be in private Mumble, I assume, in their fleet channel and in the campus. So I'll just go through these points. So stay safe. I think I've just logged into the game, so I think we're still at peace based on AlBaqi. I know AlBaqi Octopolis declared war, but that won't start until tomorrow. But so we are safe as safe can be in Eve for once until tomorrow. But I would still encourage people to dock up and be safe. If you've not already done so, configure your Mumble to push to talk, so you don't interrupt the class. And just to be confirmed, this covers Tech-1 industry and manufacturing. I encourage questions throughout. If you see a slide that you want to ask a question on, just ask it at the time, either by asking it on Mumble or by typing into lecture.E-UNI, but I shall also leave a gap at the end for some questions as well. So what is industry? So if you played other MMOs, then industry is Eve's term for crafting. You'll probably find it a lot more complex, as Eve tends to be with everything, than other crafting games. I started off crafting in Star Wars: The Old Republic, which was a very simplistic approach, a lot depending on random number generators, and kind of favoured the PvE top end people. So when I got into Eve, I kind of found it to be a much more specialist niche area, which required specific skills, and there's quite a few barriers to other people just randomly producing some valuable items, which I find good for me. So Tech-1 items, in terms of industry, they require minerals. Some of them only require minerals that you can find in high-sec, so you can do industry quite safely in high-sec, producing some Tech-1 modules quite happily. Some of the more complicated items like ships and weapons can require ore that you only find in low or no security space. In terms of rig manufacturing for T1 rigs, this is a different system, requires different materials, and if you wonder what salvage materials are for, then it's for rig manufacturing. Last point on just the basics of industry is fundamentally the same items and the same materials are required for everything. But in terms of the size of the item, large, medium, and small, you just find that different quantities are required. So the bigger the item, the more you require, but it will be identical materials to what's found in the small items. My next slide is have a plan. So this is one of the key messages I want to get across in my class on industry. It's all very well buying some blueprints, getting some materials and building the items. But the key thing is how you're going to actually sell those items and establish your supply chain, whether that's supplying yourself or getting items to and from the market. But we are, as we found, almost permanently war decked, so I wouldn't encourage and actively discourage anyone from hauling their made goods to and from market hubs. Okay, so when you start buying blueprints ready for manufacturing, what I'd ask you to think about is how you're going to obtain your raw materials. So by that, I mean the ore or the salvage. You can self-supply that if you're a miner or a salvager. If you do a lot of combat in PvE, you can salvage as you go. The other option is obviously just buying from the marketplace, which is other people doing those things and you buying from them and then using that material to then make your own items, which you then sell back to the market. I've linked a link there to the vault hauler for E-UNI characters, which again I would strongly recommend. Even if you don't take up industry, then you're probably sooner or later going to require go to a trade hub, and those always come in handy no matter what your interest in the game. If you are going to buy and sell your items to the trade hubs, then you will need to manage your buy and sell orders. So if you're looking to sell your materials, your goods, and looking to buy materials from the marketplace, you will find what's called market PvP. And by that, what we mean is when you put up your goods for sale, unless you're selling immediately to whatever prices people want to pay. You'll probably be using sell orders, and what you'll find within a few minutes, more likely someone will have undercut you by potentially as little as 0.1 ISK. And it's up to you then to manage your orders to the point where you can sell your goods. You can change your sell orders every 5 minutes, or your buy orders every 5 minutes by whatever amount you require. But in busy times, particularly weekends, you will find you need to maybe not stay logged in constantly into your market alt, but you may need to find yourself undercut by several players with lots of items, and you just don't sell your goods. I'd always encourage people not to stockpile up too many items in one go as well. I'll tell you a brief story about someone in the AMC who declared themselves very rich by making Tech-2 industry mining crystals, but he never actually sold any. So he was building up this massive stockpile, but for whatever reason never actually took them to the marketplace. So he thought he was rich, but in terms of risk, he was still relatively poor, but just had loads of assets which he would have probably crashed the market on if he actually ever sold them. But what I'd say is, don't be the guy who's trying to sell 2,000 Tech-1 items in one go. Regularly go into to and from the marketplace to keep your turnover high. As an example, I've linked my 3 characters that I use in my industry supply chain. So I have my main character who produces my goods. That is my portrait on my Zeerse character. And these other 2 are the portraits of my other characters. One hauls the goods to and from the marketplace, and on his return trips he brings back materials. And my other alt, who I refer to as my marketeer, he sits in the Jita Trade Hub and occasionally undocks, so never's not quite true, but he stays in that station, and I log into him to do my buy and sell orders rather than either travel to and from or use jump clones. It's a lot more efficient for me to do that, and that's my kind of preferred way of establishing my characters to do the mine industry. Only one of them really produces the goods, but the other 2 kind of help him get them to market and sell them. I have seen some people just ignore the main character side of things, so there are some PvP or PvE players who have industry on a second alt who also does the hauling, so you don't necessarily have to follow my split, but I'll probably suggest you'd end up with at least 2 characters probably loaded in on your industry, one producing and the other buying, selling, or hauling. I think we should be on slide 5. So industry skills. So there are 2 sets of skills relevant for industry. The main one is fundamentally industry related, which is the production skill branch. For each level of industry, which is a skill, then that reduces your manufacturing time by 4% per level. And effectively what that does, that speeds up the time it takes to build an item. So the more items you produce, the more ISK you make in a shorter space of time. Mass production is probably more important in a way. That allows you to do more manufacturing jobs per level. So what we mean by that is if you trigger an industry job, that takes up a line on your industry line, and until that line is finished, you can't produce anything more. So this allows you to make multiple lines of industry jobs, which is pretty key for a serious industrialist. Next one, supply chain management. If you do have a fairly active character who moves around a lot, then it is quite annoying to have to return to that station or that structure just to do industry. So supply chain management allows you to remotely start and do other things on your industry jobs. So I would encourage people to use that if they have a character who undocks and does other things while the industry is working. And on the science skill branch, we have effectively skills that allow you to research your blueprints. So research reduces the time efficiency per skill level. Metallurgy allows you to speed up the material efficiency research of blueprints. Laboratory operation is the same as mass production, really. It allows you to do more science jobs on your industry character. And scientific networking, again, a similar concept to remotely managing those jobs, which is a useful thing to do. It's quite frustrating if you're out and about not to be able to do those things. Advanced skills, you can upskill even further. These aren't available to alpha characters, but on the Mego account you can go into advanced industry, which lets you do further reduction in your researches. You can do more mass production, and you can do more laboratory operation. So you can end up with 10 and 10 in terms of 10 production jobs and 10 science jobs if you max out those skills, which most industrialists will do. So, if anyone's wondering why you do all the science skills and the science training, it is about efficiency. So if you are researching your blueprint, you can get it to a maximum of 10% material efficiency and 20% faster to produce the items. That gives you extra margin because you require less materials, and you'll be able to sell your items either for a greater profit or lower price to beat your competitors. Copying is science. I'm trying to think now if there's any skill directly related to science. I believe the science skill, the base science skill, does improve your copying timescales, I believe. I'll just double check that. Yes, so the actual science skill on its own reduces the 5% bonus to blueprint copying speed per level. One thing I would say about the science skills is you will find probably a lot of industrialists with lots of blueprints. So what they do is they research one. When it maxes out in terms of efficiency, they will then probably buy another one and put that back into the research, and they start making that first one while they're researching more and more. So it allows them to diversify as well. So it allows them to protect themselves from big market swings. But if you've got those jobs available, then you tend to start to use them for something, no matter what. So I think my blueprint original library stands at about 300 odd blueprints. If you decide just to make the items with an unresearched blueprint original, then the other guy who's competing against you will have done that, so they will be able to undercut you, or they'll be making more risk than you. So I would never recommend. Well, people can start producing industry items from lower researched blueprint originals if they want to, but I'd actually recommend a bit of patience and research the blueprints first before you start producing any items. I've kind of covered this, but in terms of material efficiency and time efficiency, 10% is the maximum on material efficiency, but goes up 1 per cycle. So it takes one job to, or one run of that job to increase by 1% up to a maximum of 10 jobs. And on time efficiency, it's 20%, but it's 2% increments. So it's still the same 10 cycles, but it gets you up to 20% instead. What you will find is the deeper you go into that efficiency, the longer each job will take. So there's a vast difference between 1% and the final 10%. On modules, it can take, I think, literally about 20 minutes to get 1% efficiency, but the 10th most percent will take several days. The other thing with efficiency research as well is that the items will take longer the bigger they are. So if you're researching, say, a frigate blueprint, and I've used an example here from 8 to 9% material efficiency, it takes 9 days on a frigate. And if you do exactly the same step in a destroyer, it takes 13 days. And it will take longer for cruisers, longer for battleships. Modules tend to be the same as well. So small modules will be a lot quicker than larger modules. Just a little hint here. If you are going to produce or take that final step for, say, 9% to 10%, then if you do plan on producing that item, then you can take a copy of it before you put it into the research job to give yourself something to make some items from while you're waiting for that research to finish. So how do we acquire blueprints? So this is quite important in terms of efficiency as well. Blueprint originals are acquired from NPC seeded orders. They will be base items, they won't be researched at all. And you can tell the difference between an NPC order and a player order because the NPC will be able to seed their contract up to a year. Players can only put sale orders up for maximum 90 days. So you don't see NPC orders lower than 90 days as a general rule, and they'll be much bigger and much longer. So Ersin's asked a question, which I'll just link my website that I do use for that purpose while I'm talking. But I have said probably the cheapest price if the competition is particularly high and people are being particularly strange, like sometimes these players are, then you can actually find potentially a player selling a blueprint for less than the NPC order because they've decided they want to get the ISK as quick as possible and just put up for some whatever price they want. Because some blueprints and most modules and items and chips are somehow related to one or the other factions, you may find them more prevalent in some areas of space than the others. So, for example, particularly ship blueprints will tend to be found in this faction space of that NPC faction. So you won't find Galente ship blueprints in Amar space, for example. and vice versa. So you may have to either travel or go to the market and pay whatever price the market is, or you can always put up buy orders as well. So John uses that one. I use the other one I've linked to look at finding BPOs. What I do find with all the external websites is they do need some kind of player interaction to actually trigger on finding them on the marketplace. So what I mean by that is if a player buys one of the NPC seeded blueprints, it will appear on the website. If no one's bought a blueprint from a particular NPC for a long time, then I think it actually drops off completely. So you still may find inaccuracies in that, but one of those two websites is probably good for finding out. The one I've linked is also good for skill books as well.
Eve market data seems to not be being updated. As I compared it to Eve Central, and the prices were way off.
Which one was that, Calam?
Eve market data. I used to use that for my Excel sheet, but it was off by a lot.
Yeah, it can be. Yeah, if they haven't, I think with the changes that CCP have done with their interfaces, then it can be that some of the websites haven't. If the person developing it has gone off the game, then they may not be updating it. But it may still be good for NPC orders, but it may not be good for general market knowledge. But yeah, I'd probably encourage it. Then sort of Google can help as well. Just googling websites will bring up some options as well. Just to give an example, I've linked a Hobgoblin blueprint, which is one of the weird electronic warfare ones, but it's a good example of what we really mean by this. So you can see the NPC seeded orders as 250,000 ISK, with expires in 300 days, 320 days, etc. Those are NPC orders, and you can see the price there. The ones at Jita in 4.4 in the Trade Hub, you can see they're all less than 90 days, and one player has decided to try to sell them at 8,000 ISK more than the seeded price. Another one's trying a bit more. And we've got one guy at the end who's got 3 blueprints to sell, who's done it on with his million, sort of 1.25 million that he's trying to hopefully think someone will come along and buy. So sometimes you have to decide really, is it worthwhile traveling to find a blueprint or just buying it from the marketplace versus what players mark up. So if it was me and I had to travel 10 jumps for a blueprint original and I was faced with an extra 8,000 ISK, I'd probably buy that seeded player one rather than travel to that one. But it all depends on the prices, etc. So there are more than blueprint originals in the game. There are also blueprint copies. So if a player wants to sell a blueprint copy, they cannot put them on the market. They have to put them on contracts. So the other source of blueprints for you could be the contracts tab on your Neocom, and you can find some on there. The reason for that is because if there's particularly sort of pirate faction one, for example, for ships which are dropped, then those players sell them via the contracts tab. And if you do research your blueprint original, you can make copies of that and put that on for sale as well. You do find quite a strong market for the more expensive blueprint original copies, or the larger items which cost a lot to buy the original for. People can make some risk from copying that and put them up as well. So it's to save, people do use them to save themselves time on research, and they can be relatively cheap actually, so it is worthwhile thinking about if you're looking at some of the larger or longer research items. There are some basic Tech-1 items that can drop from NPC loot. Jones, for example, can drop some of the ancillary weapons that are sometimes in demand. If into exploration, then you can also sometimes find them in data sites and relic sites. Wormholes, for example, tend to drop Tech-2 versions, but in high sec or low sec sometimes, then you can find just the more unusual Tech-1 items in blueprint copies.
Also combat sites.
Yes. Mm-hmm. There are faction items, so a lot of people fly faction ships. So the other way to obtain the blueprint copy for those is to exchange them for loyalty points. As an industrialist, that's a very inefficient way to do it. You'll find probably the faction warfare guys are much more efficient at obtaining loyalty points than you. So I wouldn't recommend anyone grinds loyalty points just to obtain faction ship blueprints, for example. It takes a long time. You need a lot of loyalty points, etc. So, but occasionally they do come up on the marketplace, but it's up to you whether you like the price or not. Just briefly, research blueprint originals. So yeah, if you do research any aspect of the blueprint, even by 1%, then you cannot put it on the marketplace. And there is a market for people who do nothing but research and then put those blueprints up on the market or contracts. So other people who are not willing to wait but want that efficient blueprint will come along and buy them. They can be quite expensive in terms of risk value though, so it's really a balancing act between will you be willing to wait for the research to finish, or do you have enough risk to buy that blueprint originally? The other thing I'd ask people to just think about as well is if you do find a particular item that sells well and it's profitable for you, then you can always buy more than one copy or one blueprint original. So you can own several. There's no reason why you can't own several different BPOs of the same item and just keep on producing that if that's providing you a good risk. So don't constrain yourself with just one BPO per item. If you want to, you can buy more. That's also a good alternative to copying the blueprint before you start a long research job as well. If you can carry on producing from one blueprint as you're researching on the other. Now, sourcing materials. This is the other aspect of industry which is very important to make risk. So I've talked about briefly, I touched on it in the introduction. There's two ways of obtaining materials for your industry. One is the marketplace. And what you do I would also recommend placing buy orders. You can buy from sale orders. So if you're familiar with the market trading, then if you open up your regional marketplace, you always find two halves of the window. There's a seller's and a buyer's window on your market tab. The sellers are people who've put up a sale order, and that's someone who's got the item and has put a certain price against it and waiting for someone to buy it. The buyers are people who've decided they want the item at a certain price, and they will sit there and wait for that item to be sold to them by someone who comes onto the marketplace and sells it. So in terms of the efficiency and the margins of the two, you will find there's a much greater margin in placing buy orders. So I'd always recommend, on a general rule, that you would buy from buy orders and sell to sell orders. So you're kind of getting the best of both worlds there. You're selling to people who don't want to wait and they want to buy your item, and you're buying from people who turn up to the trade hub and just want to sell their goods as well, or their materials to you on your buy price. There are occasions where if you're happy with either version of that, you can just buy and sell to whatever price someone else has allocated. But in terms of maximizing your margin, the key thing here is buy low and sell high. I've also linked the wiki for trading. There are lots of skills which help you with trading in terms of increasing that margin. It's quite an in-depth area, so I won't go into too much in literacy class, but it is worthwhile looking at if you are going to go with a market to trade alt, then it is worthwhile training them up into several of those trading skills. The other way to do it is self-supply, which is quite a common method. So if you are a miner, then you can mine in high security space or any security space really, and then if you take that into a suitable facility, you can reprocess that into minerals and use the minerals to produce the items. So the thing I do point out here is I have mentioned some items require the lower security ores you find in more dangerous parts of space. You don't necessarily have to go to those areas of space if you want to self-supply. There are ore anomalies which spawn in high security space for low-sec ores, and low-sec anomalies that spawn in low-sec, for example. So if you keep an eye out on your probe scanner window and travel around your local area, you probably would have seen some of those. Omber anomalies, AlBaqi, for example, can be found in high sec. You just have to keep your eye out for them, and when they appear, you do find people tend to jump on them quite readily. They can be more valuable than high sec ore anyway, but it will require you to train to potentially additional skills there to make it worthwhile. It is a risk versus reward thing though, so if you fancy going into no space to do some mining, obviously anyone can attack you without any punishment, so I would tend to recommend you do that in an area where you can feel as safe as possible. For uni couches, that could be the NSC, for example. Does anyone want to give me their version of a definition of what I mean by the free ore trap?
I'm guessing you don't count your own time as valuable?
Yeah, in a nutshell, that's basically it. Yeah. So by this, what we mean is there are some people out there who produce items that effectively consider what they mine as free. I've got on my ship and I've gone out and I've mined that ore and I've processed it into minerals and I've built my item and I'm in the money. I sell that item and I've made whatever ISK for profit. So the trap with that is that those people can basically sell their goods for any price that they really want to because they perceive that as profit. The trap that we define really is the raw materials may actually be worth more than the item they're selling that they've input into it. So they're trapped in that space of thinking they're making money by selling the items, and what they don't actually realize is they'd actually make more ISK by taking the actual ore to market and selling it. So I'd always recommend people don't fall into that trap of considering their time and raw materials that they self-supply as free. You do need to balance that out with what you could else be doing, and also ISK efficiency perspective. You can find yourself quite easily making items at a loss in terms of the value of that against the raw materials. The trick is to identify what people are actually buying the materials for. That makes more profit than your item, to then make it justified mining that ore yourself. You do have to be quite efficient at mining to make it worth your while. So miners, for example, in the AMC are probably at the level where it makes sense for them to self-supply ore to themselves. If you're a bit of a casual miner, for example, then again, I'd sort of make it look at, you must be probably good at something else in the game, maybe PvE, for example, and you may actually find yourself more efficient from an ISK perspective, running combat sites or security missions, whatever you do, spending your time, and just buying the materials from the marketplace. So again, in terms of the free ore trap, it's kind of similar where if you're not a specialized miner or high skills miner, then you might find it just more efficient to carry on doing your specialized activity and buy from the marketplace. Salvaging is kind of the same concept. So the commonly held view that I've got here is that larger combat sites are worthwhile salvaging. And if you're running level 4 security missions, those are worthwhile salvaging as well, but probably anything less than that is the salvage material you get out of that activity is probably not worth the time it takes to salvage it. What you'll also find is, depending on what space you're in, pirates will drop or provide different types of salvage material in different ratios. So depending on what you're making, your space may favor certain types of rig production as opposed to others. So you do need to probably learn what those are. Probably a very basic example of that is in MR space, the rats will probably drop armor plating at a higher rate than other types of space, and you can use that for kind of Trimark armor rigs. Probably in the other types of space, you're looking at shield rigs, for example. So if you're thinking about trying to make armor rigs in Serpentis space, then you may find yourself short of more materials than if you were doing it in the Mars space. Just briefly, the other source of salvage materials is hacking relic sites, but it's very sporadic and can be, particularly in high sec space. I would never suggest anyone tries to self-supply industry from hacking relic sites because it's pretty bad in high sec. If you do find yourself doing it in wormhole space, you're going to probably be obtaining a lot of Tech-2 materials, so it's not really relevant for Tech-1. I do find some people absolutely determined to self-supply everything they possibly can for the industry. My view of that is it's probably achievable, but it's going to be very difficult and probably not that much fun. So what I tend to suggest to people is mix it up. If you are doing something that self-supplies some aspect of industry, then do it if you want to. If you're a miner, then mine away. If you're not doing that in high sec, you will find yourself eventually faced with having to obtain some of the no-sec minerals from the marketplace, which is basically what I do. I tend to spend most of my time in high-sec mining, so I can supply most minerals to myself, but I will require at some point some of the low-sec ores to make my items, so I will just go to the marketplace and buy that. Eve is effectively a collaborative game, even if it's not direct collaboration. Then you will, I do sort of say to people, I think you'll probably find it at some point possible to self-supply everything you want to. Next slide is just the basic manufacturing process screen. So you're probably familiar with this. I believe the new player experience actually takes you through a basic production cycle of one item. So the things I've highlighted here are the inputs required. Those need to be full, of course. And a key thing that some people forget to do is just allocate which hanger it's from. So you can fill up your stake container, for example, with materials and just allocate whatever you require from it. We've also highlighted the green box there, the total job cost there, which I'll come on to in a second, on why that can be higher or lower. I think Kinkajou has experienced the free ore trap mindset. So where to manufacture? So there's several aspects of this. Which system you're in does make a difference. There are some industry stations in Jita, and obviously people do produce industry there because they're lazy and they don't want to haul back and forth to marketplace, so they actually manufacture in Jita. What you do notice though is if you are producing items in Jita, the system index fee, which is like a system tax that the system applies depending on how much industry is undertaken in that system. In Jita it's over 11%. When you go out from Jita to one of the less populous systems, then you should find that actually less than 1%, which over time does make a fair amount of difference. So my recommendation and the way I do things, and most industrialists will probably do it, is to not produce items in Jita itself, but you're somewhere else with the lower index and you haul your items to the trade hub. You can undertake industry quite happily in an NPC station, which provides those kind of facilities. They do charge a default 10% tax on top of the system index fee, which is high compared with player-owned structures, which come on to. But the benefits of it is that you are absolutely safe in an NPC station. You can't be blown up. Your assets can't be blown up, so you can never lose your blueprint originals that are in that station. They're absolutely safe. The alternatives are player-owned structures, and there's two types of those at the moment. There are star bases, which you probably understand as POS. This is the oldest system that has existed in the game for some time. And the concept is you find a moon, you put up what's called a control tower, and you can then add other types of facilities onto that control tower, like arrays which build items like ammunition, ships, etc. Because you own this structure, there's no tax, and it does have time bonuses above station industry. But when you do put up a POS, you are required to fuel it, which basically means it has to be kept active by a fuel that you can buy or make. So there is an outlay here in terms of buying the initial tower plus arrays plus fuel to keep it going. You can find them attacked as well, so you may buy some defenses. The other constraint with the POS system is it can only be used by corp members with appropriate robes. So if you're in the uni, you won't be allowed to own a personal POS. It encourages war declarations, and the more structures that we have, the more declarations that we get. So there are some exceptions in terms of campuses who own structures, particularly the Wormhole campus. But an individual is not allowed to own a POS in the uni. You can have an alt corp course who can do industry for you, and the reason why you can't own a POS on that character, but your uni character wouldn't be enabled to use that POS. The other aspect of POSs to be aware of is they will be phased out. So CCP are currently introducing engineering complexes, and they will decentivize POS ownership and incentivize engineering complexes as time goes on. The other downside, obviously, with POSs is they can be blown up by aggressors. So even high sec, if you declare war on that corp, you can blow up their assets, including POS towers. And if there's anything in the arrays at the time, then they can drop as loot for the aggressors, and that's a common tactic that we're kind of seeing probably in the last year or so. Some specialist corps who go around just more declaring either active corps or inactive corps looking to blow up their assets and get the loot. Engineering complexes, they're the new structures. So probably a simple way to explain these is they're a citadel that does industry. Their tax is set by the owner, and they can set different rights, access rights, and abilities to do industry by the owners as well. So what you will find is some people have their engineering complexes open to the general public, and they will set you a tax to use that complex. Others want to keep it in corp or even to themselves, so you won't be able to dock at those or use those as facilities. It really depends on the owners and what access rights they decided to allow their complex. I've said should be cheaper than station tax. I haven't yet seen anyone charge that horrendous a tax on their player-owned engineering complex, but I'm sure there may be some people out there who are potentially looking to exploit players who don't check the tax rates, perhaps. So I would always make sure before you start any industry jobs that you check the tax rate you're being charged by the owners. Once you start the job, it's set. They can't change it, but they can change it after you start your job. So it's something to keep on checking to make sure you're getting a fair deal and not being taken advantage of. Engineering complexes will be more efficient than station industry, and if the owners have fitted certain types of rigs, and there are many of them, then it can provide additional bonuses as well. Public ownership or owners who make their complexes open to public tend to try to be helpful, hopefully, and they sometimes describe their complex name as what rigs are fitted for the bonuses to encourage people to use them. Otherwise, you may actually, the only other way to tell really is to directly contact them and ask them if what bonuses they offer on their complex. I'm aware, for example, I know the HSC has several kind of our corporate friendly engineering complexes. We've got a few near the AMC as well, and the other campuses I think all have some kind of either in corp or out of corp industry complexes, probably owned by members who will be offering preferential rates to those you can get from the general public. So it's probably worthwhile inquiring in your local campus what people tend to use for industry. As with positives, it is possible to blow up an engineering complex. In HiSec, it can take it doesn't take much time in terms of the combat, but the mechanics force that complex to be blown up over a week-long cycle. So it is also worthwhile just double-checking if you're going to use an out-corp complex. Is that corp under war declaration? The risk with that is that if you do get that industry complex blown up while your goods are in it, your actual goods are safe. They go to what's called asset safety. But if you have started any jobs which are midway through at the time it's exploded, then you will lose all the materials for that job. However, the good news is blueprints, originals, do go back into asset safety, so those are safe. But you do potentially have a loss there on anyone who's blowing up your complex that you're using at any time. If you're not in HiSec and you're in low, null, or wormhole space, then the complexes will provide additional bonuses above and beyond HiSec versions. So it is worthwhile, if you're not in HiSec but in one of the other campuses, to consider where you're going to make those and what benefits you can get out of industry. Now we get on to what to produce. So if you're starting out on industry and haven't started yet, then I'd recommend you start small and expand from there. So anyone who's yet to buy any blueprints at all, I'd always recommend you start with modules. They're cheaper and quicker to buy than ships and larger items, and you can get research on them quite quickly. Within less than a month, you can have several fully researched blueprints to start producing the items for. Once you're producing those and making some profit, you can then expand into larger items that take longer to produce or research. Bad news is there is no secret to making billions of ISK overnight with industry. So I can't indicate a list of items where I'd say make these and make billions. It really depends on market forces. I've given a few examples here of where markets can spike. New items, for example. What you do find on day of release for certain items is don't bother researching it, just produce them and put them up for several million and people come along and buy them, because people will. You can also find shifts in the marketplace due to nerfs and buffs to certain items or ships, for example, and the market will react to those. And the key message there is just I would always recommend diversifying to several different things. Don't get tied into one particular item or ship or module. Euclid's asked about ammo. So there are, I think there is, ammo is one of those items where you probably have to mass produce it to make a good ISK return on it. You will make a profit on ammo because everyone needs it, everyone buys it. But a lot of people also produce it, and it also drops as loot as well. So there's a few issues there around profitability margins. But again, what I have done there is linked you a useful tool which is called ISK per hour. And there is a class on how to use that tool as well. That's the coder and developer gave to the E-UNI. That's on YouTube. So what I would recommend as well is if you are looking at things like ammo or any production, then if you download ISK per hour and learn how to use it, you can look up effectively what the margin is on that item. And it does use a system where it kind of tells you effectively what your ISK per hour is on producing those items. Okay, so ISK per hour, yes, I'd always recommend everyone who's going to start any industry download a tool like that. It's not the only tool that does similar things. There are spreadsheets, tools, things out there. If you look at our E-UNI forums, in the industry forums, there are people who kind of write themselves some kind of tool like an Excel that they use, for example. So there's lots of options there, but ISK per hour is probably recognized as probably one of the best ones out there. The other thing to bear in mind, just from a market perspective, is what is the demand for your items. And I've kind of used, I don't want to discourage people from really making certain items, but if you do look at any of the fittings on AlBaqi, the common theme you'll probably see is the guns. They're never Tech-1 base versions of the guns for that ship. They're always some kind of meta version. So the reason why I point that out is because the demand for those types of modules will be lower than others. So if you're looking at PvE or PvP and people are going to buy meta versions which can't be produced, then you really have to look at, is it worthwhile producing something like a Tech-1 gun? That said, there's still a market for those items because people will still buy them and fit them because they don't know any better. And Tech-1 variants are also an input into Tech-2, so you do find some Tech-2 industrialists who treat Tech-1 as a raw material, really. And so they will be buying their Tech-1 variants, but it's something to just bear in mind in terms of what blueprints you decide to buy. Some version or some items don't have any meta versions at all. They may have kind of faction or Tech-2 variants, but they don't have a meta version. So probably a useful suggestion to start off with is if you look at those kind of items like data relic analyzers, ship running lasers, for example, then if you're producing the base Tech-1 version, then players have no option really but to buy from you. So there's always demand for those kind of items. The other thing is, what do people lose a lot that they're going to keep on rebuying? So tackle figs, for example, if you're looking at T1 tackle figs, for people going out in fleets, then there'll be a high turnover in kind of H1s, for example. And you kind of get to learn what those things are as you essentially do other things in the game as well. So if you're buying something constantly because you're losing it a lot, then you may supply it. You don't necessarily have to take everything to a trade hub. So if you are selling locally, there are benefits and downsides to that as well. The upside of selling in a kind of localized market without any trade hubs is you'll probably be able to charge higher because there'll be less competition in supply. But you will probably find it takes a lot longer to sell your item because you're relying on passing trade or someone fairly randomly who wants to come along and buy that item. The reason why trade hubs exist is because people go there and buy everything they want in a single hit. But you can find kind of non-trade hub local markets as well. Tech-1, for example, has a fairly active market due to the fleets that are staged out for it. Urson's asked a question here around sell orders. So is it best to fill your orders in Utah with more competition or in another hub with low competition but steady filling rate? Maybe. So yeah. So I think The answer to that is it depends. Is one of those Eve answers where it all depends really. So if you're buying and selling in the MAR, for example, you will find both supply and demand prices are higher. So if you were to use a MAR as your local hub, then if you bought them your raw materials from a MAR, you'd be paying more than you would at Jita. But on the adverse side, you'll also be able to sell your items at a higher price than you would at Jita, just because of supply and demand and more people go to Jita than anywhere else. So the kind of answer, Ersin, is really if you're prepared to wait for your ISK, you could, for example, kind of buy materials at Jita and then take them to another trade hub once you produce items, but you're probably likely to wait longer. But probably at any trade hub there are certain items which are constantly in demand. So I think the answer is it's up to you really in terms of you can make greater margin at different hubs, but you may wait longer for your ISK. Personally, I do all my trading at Jita, both buying materials and selling, because I don't really want to spend my time hauling from Jita to another place or to and from other places. So I like the turnover of Jita. There's a lot of demand at Jita, so I like to get my ISK fairly quickly when I produce my items, just because it lets me move on to something else. One of the trade skills does depend on, you are constrained on the sale orders and buy orders as well, so that's something to bear in mind. If you do have fairly low trade skills on your alt, then you'll find it difficult to keep on waiting for orders to be fulfilled, either sellers or buys. So my character, I think my old Jita alt has about 20 orders you can put up, which you can conceivably fill quite easily. So if I end up deciding to put those out in like a Do-Dixie character, for example, then I could be in the position where I can't buy and sell any new items because I've filled out my capacity for my alt. So trade skills is quite important there as well. So that's kind of an answer. It's not an easy one, but there's a kind of clear answer thing, I think, on that one. One of my last slides here is just on some alternatives to just the standard items that you may think to produce. So I think the Astero is quite an interesting example of how you can kind of convert PvE activity into ISK from an industry perspective. If you have run your own drone sites, you will potentially have drops or obtained a Nexus chip at some point. If you're wondering why those are valuable items, it's really because they can get turned into Astero blueprint copies for 1.1. From a raw material perspective, you can actually buy those at Jita as well. So when I was putting the slides together, I looked up the Jita buy price for an Nexus chip for an Astero, which is the 46X. And you can buy those at 48.6 million at Jita on a buy order. So people who do PvE, who want theirs quickly, will just come along and sell you those chips at that price. If you then take that chip to a the Loyalty store, you can exchange that for a blueprint copy of an Astero. The reason why that's good is because it requires a very little amount of materials to make. It's only a T1 frigate, although it is a faction one. But the estimated value on minerals when I looked it up was about 350,000 ISK. So assuming you then make that Astero with those minerals and that chip exchange, then you can then take that Astero back to Jita and sell it at 58 million. So you can see there that you're making just about 9 million ISK on making that one chip. And for a T1 item, that's a very good return. So it's just an example how if you think a little bit outside the box, you can make money doing industry by not just doing the standard kind of BPO route. If you keep your eyes open, look for opportunities, then you can make good value on other types of items. The second example I've got is still a T1 item. It's a prototype cloaking device. The inputs are a bit more advanced than usual items, so you do require PI goods, which you can either buy from the market or, again, set up a PI chain to supply them. It does also require some advanced skills as well to produce. We can't just produce it from the standard industry skills. We do require graviton physics and quantum physics. But for each one of these, when I looked at the kind of input values versus the output in terms of selling it at Jita, then you can make about $500,000 per module, and that's good return for a Tech-1 item. So it may not sound much as a one item, but if you make 20 of those, then you're looking at obviously $500,000 times 20, for example. And again, it's a good way of just with a little bit more thought in what to make and a bit more skilling, you can increase your margins. We are at the end of the class. Before I go on to wrap up, I will just go on to the next slide as well. So on my last slide, I have put some useful links here. So if you are interested in buying a POS, I probably wouldn't recommend it at this stage because of engineering complexes, but if you do, there's a link there to the POS. I've also linked to the dev blog on engineering complexes as well, and what's called asset safety, so be familiar with that mechanic. ETH Central is probably what most people go to look at buying and selling prices before they go in with the items. So again, there are alternatives to that one, but that's probably the most commonly used one to identify where potentially there are good sell orders or good buy orders for goods and materials. And the last two there are both on basically the self-supply route. So if you are reprocessing ore, it's not quite that simple. You can lose quite a lot of ore if you don't have high skills. So make sure you read that if you're looking at mining. And the last one is about salvaging, which that link will provide you with an insight into which types of materials drop from the different types of rats.
By the way, have you checked if you can do researching on AlphaClone? Or maybe just on the extra slots you have on the account?
So alpha clones, yes, I think alpha clones are allowed to do one level of science. So I don't think they can do. So I think an alpha clone can research one blueprint at a maximum per time, but they can't do any more than that one. So for alpha clones, they're fairly constrained. It is possible, but it's quite constrained on alpha clones along with everything else. The other slots, if you're an Omega account and you're looking at, I guess, a second slot on your main account, then I guess it depends on if you're willing to buy a multi-train certificate to train that character up, or for your main character training while you train the other one. So it's one of those things. It's an individual choice whether you pause your main and transfer that training onto an alt, or pay some real money to do it.
Suppose if you are space rich, you could just inject the skills.
Yeah, and you can also buy multi-train certificates from the market as well, which cost about the same as the Flex. But yeah, you can either just skill inject an alt to train up into industry, but then obviously that's increasing your initial outlay. So sooner or later you're going to have to factor that into your costs in some shape or form. But yeah, if you're space rich, then you're looking for something new to get into. Then industry is a very deep area of the game to get into. 2 years on, just reached Tech-3 industry. I haven't been training constantly towards it, but I've been distracted by other things along the way, like flying ships and so on. But it's taken me really 2 years to get skilled, or spend enough time to be willing to get skilled into Tech-3 industry.
Thank you again.
You're welcome. Okay, well, I'm going to head back into the private Mumble, but if anyone wants to either mail me or just tap me up on Mumble, then I'm happy to answer any questions. So I'll see you over there.